Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Okay, everyone, what does a show look like with zero prep? That's what you're going to find out today.
I thought that's what we normally do.
No, usually we do 5 minutes of prep. Today, it's absolutely zero. We both had a rough couple of weeks. We actually apologize. We've been off. This is almost 2 weeks between shows, so it was not intentional, but sometimes life gets in the way. And, oh, by the way, welcome, everyone. We are your hosts, Rich Kroll and Mark Weaver. That was a disjointed start, wasn't it?
I don't even remember who you are.
So, Richie, any words of wisdom, tip of the day, or anything like that from the Kroller?
I'm going to change my tip of the day to adding a personal experience visual witness of a potential idiot for the week.
Okay.
At the end of your nominations.
Okay, so we'll move into that when the time comes. I want to remind our listeners we're about a month or 5 weeks into our new phase where we're up and going with our fundraising apparatus.
Our new fiscal year?
Our new fiscal year is going. We have our supporting listeners page of our website up and going. There's multiple options for you to pursue. If you have other ideas about how you'd like to be involved with the show or sponsor the show or advertise on the show, send us an email, supportinglisteners@areweidiots.com. By the way, there's also, I want to throw out a promo once in a while. As you may or may not know, all our show music is provided by the New You, the Eric Weaver Experience. And there's also a new page on our website where you can watch the making of their album. It's a YouTube documentary on that. It's quite fun. And then also you can buy their music on all the music platforms. So I encourage you to support the show by also supporting the musicians who support our show. So what do you think about that, Richie? We're branching out in a lot of different ways.
Very impressive. You always impress me.
I wonder who's going to be the first company to advertise on the Are We Idiots show. We need someone to break the ice. If you're a local-based business in the southeast Pennsylvania area or southern New Jersey area, there's a lot of our listeners are in that area. If you have a web-based business, we're a perfect solution to that. So we want to get into that realm. Come talk to us, supporting listeners at areweidiots.com.
I predict it'll be Google or ESPN.
Okay, as our first advertiser. Well, that'd be a good start. All right, Richie, on our show today, Idiot of the Week. I have some listener submissions for that, and then you're going to chime in with your own little variant of that. Then we're going to talk about climate change, and that is a huge topic. We'll be able to get into it a little bit, but certainly not in all the minutia. And then we're going to finish up. It's been 6, maybe 5 months since we did a Kroller Wiki. And that might be we might be a little tight on time at that point, but we'll get a couple of Kroller Wikis in there to conclude the show.
It's criminal. It's taken that long to get back to me.
Who's in charge of the show anyhow? We got to get on that person. All right, Richie. So submission number 1 for Idiot of the Week, and these will go pretty quickly. Huntsville police officer Gerald Johnson says he was eating at the Meteor Buffet restaurant when a fight broke out. Plates were shattered, and a woman was beating a man. Johnson says diners had been waiting in line for crab legs for more than 10 minutes, and they lost their tempers once the food came out. The station reports Chiquita Jenkins is charged with assaulting John Chapman, who suffered a cut on his hand. Chapman is charged with disorderly conduct. Court records weren't available to show whether either person has a lawyer. So you can see this happening, right? So they're waiting for 10 minutes. The crab legs are the piece de resistance of the salad bar or the buffet, and they all come out. And they're all like diving in with tongs, and he's probably hitting his hand with tongs. So any comments on that before we go to?
Well, that's legitimate. I mean, if it takes more than 5 minutes to get crab legs, I start knocking people out too.
I mean, you can only eat so much cheese balls and salad. You know, when the crab legs come out, that's the primo stuff.
I would I think the restaurant's at fault there.
All right, nominee number 2. Groom arrested. This has local, actually, to us. Groom arrested for allegedly sexually assaulting teenage waitress at his own wedding.
I shouldn't laugh at that.
This is Richboro, right near us in Bucks County. A groom in Bucks County was arrested at his own wedding for allegedly sexually assaulting a teenage waitress, a criminal complaint shows. Matthew Amers is accused of assaulting the girl during his wedding reception at Northampton Valley Country Club. Northampton Township Police responded to the report of an indecent assault on a juvenile that night. Police say the girl was working as a waitress when the 32-year-old groom approached her during the reception and asked her to go outside. What a charmer this guy is.
She's the wife's a winner here.
Yeah. Amers told the girl, quote, "We can do whatever you want," to which she said that she had to decline and she is working. Later during the evening, she was ordered by the event staff to check supply levels in the women's bathroom. When she entered the bathroom, the groom followed her and grabbed her arm, she told police. The girl says Amers pulled her into one of the stalls and closed the door, started kissing her and assaulting her. When the groom tried to unbutton her pants, she grabbed his hand, pulled him away, and telling him his actions are not welcome. Can you kiss me like you mean it, he said, and I'll give you $100 if you do so. Eventually, the girl was able to push by the groom and out of the bathroom. Amers is facing charges of false imprisonment of a minor, corruption of minors, indecent assault, indecent exposure, disorderly conduct, and harassment. So my comment before I turn it over to you to rip this guy is, isn't this bride lucky she found out? Well, I guess actually they already got married. I guess it was the reception, so that shoots that theory. What a jerk.
You know, sometimes that's a dream wedding for some people. It's a shame this couldn't have happened at the rehearsal dinner.
Yeah.
To at least get her out of the wedding. I mean, think about you're 3 hours into your marriage and you got to get rid of the guy. But I beg the question.
My guess is he probably exhibited signs of this prior.
How do you not know?
Yeah, I mean,
if
you're that ballsy to do that at your own wedding reception, you've been on the hunt for a long time.
Unless she was dating the guy for a week and it's a shotgun wedding. I mean, come on.
Not a country club reception, though. I mean, can you imagine her parents and her family? I mean, what?
Oh, it's
low
pathetic.
Life. So what's your verdict there, Judge?
Well, I want to tell you one I experienced.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So
you may proactively nominate and award your own.
It's
idiot.
possible.
Okay. You have that power.
I've promoted and given myself winning scores in the past. So I was in Princeton, New Jersey this week for work, riding with my systems engineer, Steve Segulio, good friend of mine, and we're trying to pull into a parking garage in the town of Princeton, right next to Princeton University.
Right.
Everybody in Princeton's pretty much a professor or student or a smart person for the most part. It's a one-way street, and there's a guy in front of us, and then there's another car trying to pull into this lot. It's a automated lot. And we're not moving anywhere. And now people are trying to come out of the garage, but I'm in their way because it's a one-lane road, and we're delayed. So I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? It's a parking garage.
Like he's just trying to get the ticket to get into the garage?
So there's an old guy shouting at a young girl in front of her who is pulled about 2 feet behind the kiosk that distributes the parking tickets.
Can't reach.
She can't reach, we thought. So he's shouting at her, get in the car, move the car up. And she goes, I don't know what to do. That doesn't make sense. So she starts shouting at the guy in the glass window, the helper guy, on the other side of and on top of it, the kiosk has a blue light that blinks and says, push here for ticket, push here for ticket.
Right.
She doesn't know what to do. This is like, I'd say, a 20-year-old Princeton student. So the guy starts shouting at her. She starts shouting at the guy to leave her alone because something's wrong. Now the cars are beeping all of us, blocking they can't get out. So the guy comes out of the office.
Pushes the button, hands her the ticket.
Pushes the button, hands her the ticket. The thing goes up. She gets in the car and goes in. I'm like, are you kidding me? I said, I got to nominate her for Idiot of the Week, but I'll be nice. She might be a But it's like, is it the first time she ever drove a car? Was it the first time she ever entered a parking lot? Now it gets even crazier as we're coming out, and there's signs everywhere. Pay at the kiosk before you leave. Pay at the kiosk. She comes down and goes back to the same guy and is showing her the ticket and asking him, what do I do with this now?
Oh, my goodness.
That's hard to beat that as Idiot of the Week.
Was her first time in a car and
parking
never
lot.
experienced a parking garage before.
Mind blowing.
And probably can't read on top of that.
A 20-year-old Princeton student, probably going for geophysics and linear algebra, and she can't get in and out of a parking lot.
Of course, young people don't drive. My 3 oldest daughters do not drive. They have licenses, but they don't have car insurance. They don't own a car. They don't drive. So you're going to see more of this.
Oh, God.
This is the norm. So what's your
I'm
verdict?
going to go with the groom who can't wait another 2 hours before he gets back to the bridal suite, and he's got to attack a 19-year-old waitress, and then, oh my God,
and going to jail probably going to jail.
Unbelievable.
At least at some level.
He's right up there for Idiot of the Year so far.
All right, we should probably send the waitress $1. It's not him.
I might send the bride $1 too.
Oh, yeah. All right, folks. So we're going to transition now to talk about climate change. And the idea for this show, well, we've talked about it for a long time, but the idea really got promoted about 5 weeks ago when our favorite new congressperson, AOC, announced the new Green Deal. And we talked about some of the government programs on that on a few shows ago, but we decided to hold the environmental portions, the green portions of the new Green Deal till this show. So we'll be talking about that a little bit later on, but that's what kind of prompted this show. And as I like to do, a little background for the listeners. Our goal is to edutain on this show, so we're going to try to hopefully let you hear a perspective or two that you haven't heard before, or a fact that you haven't heard before, but also do it in an entertaining way. So, little history on the environmental movement, Rich, and then we'll get into the details. So, the environmentalist movement really started back in the late 18th century and is mostly focused on wildlife conservation. I know that's loosely related to the environment, but that's what environmentalism was back then. There was a lot of wildlife habitats established in the very late 1800s. Fast forward to 1950, the first kind of major publication on the hazards of DDT. That was probably just a little before we were born. There was a book called Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and it listed all the harmful effects of DDT, a pesticide. 70s and 80s, when we were younger, Earth Day, the first Earth Day was born.
That's not a band?
Green Day, Earth Day, yeah, it's pretty close. Greenpeace, the organization Greenpeace was formed. There was a hole in the ozone discovered over Antarctica in 1985. You started to hear the terms CO2, CO2, global warming, greenhouse gases, and the latest kind of catch-all term is climate change, which we're using for the title of this episode. And then finally, I'd say the most recent inflection point in this whole genre was the inconvenient truth. So in 2006, former Vice President Al Gore...
Didn't he invent the internet?
He did. After he invented the internet, he did a documentary called An Inconvenient Truth.
Brilliant man. Very brilliant.
2006. And he won, not only did he win the Nobel Prize, but he won, the documentary won 2 Oscars. It was a phenomenon, and it really was credited for catapulting activism in this realm, and even getting a whole new generation of people. You know, there was and when we were young, there was a lot of the hippie movement they're environmentalists, and this An Inconvenient Truth is credited with getting a lot of the younger generation to start thinking about these types of things. So we can talk about the Inconvenient Truth and some of the predictions that made. But any comments on kind of the history of environmentalism, what you know of it from growing up days, and how it's gotten to today?
Well, first of all, I hope I can vote for Al Gore in the next presidential election because that'll cure all our problems.
He's a billionaire now, so he's probably fat, dumb, and happy.
So environmental issues have really gathered steam in the last, like you're saying, 30 to 40 years, and with good reason, right? When you look at our pristine world, the earth before the Industrial Revolution, things were pretty clean. Clean air, clean living. But yes, we are clearly poisoning and polluting the earth. And I think recognizing that and all these groups forming together to come up with solutions is great, but it's also causing a lot of fake news and debatable facts. And again, it's another bipartisan type of thing where if somebody takes a stance, they're using whatever they can, factual or made up facts, to back up their stance and try to get money and funding and promote themselves. And just like everything else, when the government's involved, it's now getting very clouded and tough to figure out what's true and what isn't.
Yeah, and this we used a term on our text group this morning, confirmation bias. I think it applies here that if you don't believe that humans are greatly contributing to the warming of the earth and greenhouse gases, et cetera, you're going to read these studies that back up your beliefs. And it's just like the political realm, and the same thing on the other side. I mean, my personal opinion is I think it's incontrovertible. You like that word?
I do. Can you spell it?
Of course not. I can't spell it. Plus, I keep wanting to tell you this. We don't really have to spell anymore. It's going to evolve out of our vernacular that we're not going to have to learn to spell. Everything's spell check. Everything's voice recognition. What do you need to spell for? You don't need handwriting anymore either. So we're going to evolve away from spelling.
You ever see some of the messages spell check throws out there?
Well, those are usually the wrong word used. I can't say we'll never get away from proofreading, but I don't think you need to spell check. You don't need to spell anymore, but that's a sad thing. Anyhow, what I was going to say is that this confirmation bias, and then we are. I lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? Oh, the sorry, but no. So basically, here's where I was going to go with this. So this inconvenient truth, and I admit that it did promote these concepts and this problem that we have of humans contributing to climate change and greenhouse gases. I'm a believer that humans have contributed. The question really is, and it's still open today, is not only how much have we, because climate has changed over millions of years. It's gone up and down. There's been warming trends, cooling trends, and we're certainly in a warming trend. And I fully believe that since the Industrial Revolution, as you said, that because of some of our activities, we have definitely contributed to that. The question is, how fast is it happening? Because a lot of those predictions have not come true. And then how much of effect is really related to humans versus just naturally occurring? And then the last thing, which we'll get into, is how in the world can all these dire predictions of what will happen, how can they be valid at all when we haven't been able to predict the past at all? So any thoughts on that aspect of it? So what's your belief on the amount of human contribution to this and some of these dire predictions, which I can bring up some of them that Inconvenient Truth brought up. But what are your thoughts on that and our ability to predict that?
There are so many topics that appear pretty easy to me because both sides can be right. When you have a vast argument like this, it's very, very plausible that both sides are correct in some shape or form. So here's what I've found out. Yes, I believe we've had the 10 warmest years in the last 25 in the history of the
recent history.
Recent history.
Yeah. Since records are being kept. The polar ice caps are melting. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see a polar bear walking across 1,000 miles of ice and then a polar bear sitting on a 1 mile block of ice. So global warming is absolutely happening.
We have all sorts of changes in our weather pattern, El Ninos, the Gulf Stream, a lot more precipitation. Things have changed. Our Marches are now as cold as our Januaries and Februaries. It never used to be like that. So
Well, if it's getting warmer, why are the Marches colder?
I'll get into that in a second. But the point is, global warming is a fact. But now the question is it due to additional greenhouse gases
Did you
caused
just say
by
doo-doo?
humans? What?
Did you just say doo-doo?
Did I say doo-doo?
No, doo too, you said, but it sounded like you said doo-doo.
Oh, well, a lot of this is doo-doo. So here's the thing. To your point, they have shown there's been, like every 10,000 years, major changes in temperature going up or down. There was an ice age. There was where things were melting. It happens. It can happen due to sunspot activity. Right? The sun is so powerful. There can be solar blasts on the sun that cause these changes in climate. And climate's an average over time versus weather, which can be very spotty. So
Right.
I'm all, yeah, okay. Global warming's happening, but is it due to cars and factories? I would say it's
All the above, by the way.
probably a contributing factor. If we have millions and millions of cars and millions of factories emitting CO2 gas into the air over decades, well, you would think that's going to eventually impact even a vast atmosphere. So why can't both people be right? Now, you raise a great question, and this is where most people are like, well, geez, if it's global warming, why are winters colder in the Northeast? On such a superficial level, that might appear to be a good question.
Yeah,
but
it's not a good
also-
sample size. You're right.
It's also pretty stupid because I'll give you some common sense things. So if polar ice caps are melting, that process of melting is throwing more cool air into the atmosphere as the ice is melting that was stable. And then the Gulf Stream, which will move warm air further than cold air, grabs this additional cold air that's being emitted from the melting ice and pushes it further down into the Northeast U.S., the Southeast U.S. Or, geez, it's snowing in April and March. Well, if lakes that were once frozen are now melting, that melting of the frozen lake is going to put more precipitation into the air, and then that Gulf Stream is also going to make more rain and snow and appear what's colder in March and April. So there's a lot of real reasons.
Right. And so just to get a little technical here, and this is as you're more of a hard science guy, Rich, I'm more of a social science guy, but the whole
Soft science?
I'm a soft science.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a personal problem. But no, so a lot of the dialogue is around CO2. And I think I'm not a hard science guy, so you may correct me, but from what I know about CO2, it's a strange dichotomy, I guess is the best thing. So this whole thing breaks down into the carbon cycle. I'll read this paragraph. I think this is good for the listeners, and you can comment, but this really breaks down because CO2 is the one that's mostly responsible for warming, for greenhouse gases that are warming the atmosphere, and that's where the problem comes in. So the carbon cycle is carbon dioxide can be found in air in gaseous form and in water in dissolved form. Terrestrial plants, I can speak, use atmospheric carbon dioxide to generate oxygen that sustains animal life. Aquatic plants also generate oxygen, but they use carbon dioxide from water. The process of oxygen generation is called photosynthesis. I know you knew that. During photosynthesis, plants and other producers transfer carbon dioxide and water into complex carbohydrates, such as glucose, under the influence of sunlight. Only plants and some bacteria have the ability to conduct this process because they possess chlorophyll, a pigment molecule in leaves that they can capture solar energy with. So that's kind of the plus and negative of carbon dioxide. We need it. Obviously, plants, the whole cycle, the carbon cycle is critical for life, yet carbon dioxide is one of the main contributors to warming the planet. So give me your biology/science take on that, Richie.
It's very accurate. There is a theory that says it's not necessarily man-made CO2 emissions. It's the deforesting and the diminishing population of plant life. So as we've experienced colder winters and colder winters lasting longer, coming down through the Northeast, through farm country, there's less plants. Plants are not growing as soon as they used to in the spring, and they're dying more because of the extended winters. So all of a sudden, and there's a lot of deforestation going on with just human progress.
Right.
So every year that goes by, especially in these colder winters, less trees, less tree leaves, less plants, less plant leaves, and
Less CO2.
So
Or
therefore,
more, yeah.
less
Yeah.
CO2 processing,
Right.
because the very piece of nature that processes that, there's less of. So is it because we have less plants or more man-made CO2 emissions? It's too early to tell, but that's a viable argument.
Right. And then the other thing is, in addition to CO2, there are water vapors water vapor and clouds together account for about 75% of all greenhouse gases. But that's like a natural cycle, and this is kind of what you were talking about earlier with the lakes and what have you. There's also other non-condensing, CO2 is non-condensing, greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide. And this brings us into what I'll call the marketing side of this whole debate. And I think I brought this up on a previous show, but there is a Netflix documentary that I highly recommend if you want to learn more about this subject, called Cowspiracy. And it highlights the amount of, and we've talked about vegetarianism and veganism on the show, and that veganism is probably the right way to eat for humans and for the betterment of all human nature. Rich and I aren't vegans, but if you look at this Cowspiracy thing, you realize the animal agriculture business and everything that supports it is a huge producer of methane and nitrous oxide, not only from manure, but even just from the way they feed these animals. What blew me away, Rich, in doing some research for the show, there are 10 billion animals that are in the U.S. to support the animal agriculture business. 10 billion, and about 1 million are killed every day.
It's amazing. I didn't realize.
I mean, is that crazy?
Number.
1 million are killed every day just to support human eating meat. And this one article pointed out that if we all just cut out 10% of the meat that we ate,
1 quarter pounder with cheese.
yeah, it would make I think a difference of a million animals a year. I think that's what they said. Yeah, 1 million animals a year being killed. No, it's got to be more than that. But so, yeah, like 10 million animals a year it would make a difference. I think it was maybe a million animals a month. So what do you think about that and the fact that the proponents of climate change and solutions never bring up the fact that these big companies that are probably paying lots of money to lobbyists and to affect government policy. We've talked on previous shows about the FDA, the USDA, and how they're in the pocket of big money. That's never brought up. It's unmentionable because we don't want to offend the big money people.
Well, that's where the hypocrisy comes in, and then you
brutal.
don't know what to believe. Yeah, I looked into it as well, and the meat industry produces a huge amount of CO2 emissions in just the way both natural and unnatural processes. And that's never brought up as a contributor.
And deforestation, by the way, because they're clearing land to raise animals.
So it really should be called the convenient truths. Because, I mean, I think it's hard to ignore that millions and millions of cars and millions of factories, especially in like China, or cities where you have clear smog, right? That is CO2 and other things being poured into the atmosphere. Maybe not over 10 years, but over 50 years, over 75 years, I got to think it starts to add up and have some impact. But I can't believe it's the cause, right? So the problem is it's bipartisan again. Instead of saying there's a middle ground,
Right.
like why can't we admit that maybe we're just in 1,000 or 10,000 year cycle where the temperature is going to go up? And yes, man-made stuff is contributing something towards that, but it's not the root cause. I don't believe atmospheric conditions and climate were just sitting there, pristine, California dreaming, and then all of a sudden, because of cars and factories and now all of a sudden we've, as humans, have been able to alter drastically our climate. I got to think it was going to happen anyway, and we're making it worse.
Which leads me to my next point of I need some wisdom around this. And you mocked me several shows ago
Never.
when I used an analogy of a garden with a small little fence.
That
trying
was
to
a
stop-
bad one, but I understood where
But
you were
the
going.
same principle applies here. So if we in the United States were to make all these changes that the new Green Deal is proposing, which we'll get into in a little bit, that would be great. But we're only we have 330 million people out of a planet of 8 billion. You're talking about China and India, just them alone as almost 3 billion people. So the same principle applies as what difference does it make if China and India and 60 other countries are still building coal plants? And I did some research on this too. China, there's going to be about 1,500 new coal plants proposed around the world in 62 countries. Overwhelmingly, China is building hundreds of new coal burning plants because they're at a different stage of they're in their industrial revolution, basically. It's high tech too, but they need energy, and they can only get it from coal quickly. And so that's what they're doing. India's doing the same thing. Egypt's doing it. There's a lot of Eastern Europe that's still recovering from the post-Soviet era that's building these types of things. So what difference does it make if the whole world's not buying in?
Legitimate question. So this one's not as bad as your rabbit fence example a couple weeks ago. But supposedly, and again, what do you believe? Even though China and India, or mostly China, has a lot more people and more factories, we still are the top one or two nation producers of CO2 emissions.
Right.
Because of when you add everything collectively, whether it's the meat industry, the amount of cars we have, every family has 2-3 cars. We have plenty of factories.
But the trend there, they're catching up quickly because all the people are coming from the cities, from the country into the cities in China, and they're building these huge cities. So I mean, they're gonna run past us with emissions.
Oh, agreed. But I think the U.S. has always been the leader in manufacturing and technology and advancements. So once the U.S., although Europe's actually passing us in a lot of these areas, but I think if we take a stance, we impact the whole world because we kind of, whatever we do impacts the world good or bad at some point. So it's the same old question, why do anything about anything?
Right.
Because
You got to try.
you got to try, and 100 years from now, we're in trouble. Maybe 50 years, we're in trouble.
I don't know though about that. See, that's where my long-term optimist hat comes on because, and we can get into, I feel this way about a lot of things in government too, by the way. I knew I had to get that in.
Oh, geez.
But I'm a big believer in the power of human ingenuity, and that what no one's focusing on is the potential to solve this problem through innovation.
Okay.
And I would still say the same thing about some of our government problems. If technology is advancing so much quicker than government regulation can react to, then I think some of our problems can be solved through technology. This is where libertarians believe in the whole cryptocurrency, the whole Bitcoin thing. A lot of them believe that because not controlling the money is a huge lever that us libertarian people can
I let
use.
you finish. I was going to cut you off because now you're entering the realm of ridiculous.
Nah, I'm
You and
right on target.
You and your soft science libertarians. How are you going to refreeze the polar ice caps? Through technology?
Well, how do you know? How do you know that you won't be able to reverse the effects of some of this stuff? I mean, you're making an assumption that you know everything that will be invented.
Have we been able to stop earthquakes and landslides?
You know what, folks? I knew Rich. We were born in the early 60s, And I know when it was 1970, he was predicting the microprocessor and the personal PC and the iPhone. He knew it all. He knew what was coming.
What does that have to do
You
with
don't know what's going to
climate?
happen. You don't know what innovation could happen. We could totally reverse climate change. We could cure cancer. We have no idea what's going to happen in the future.
Oh my gosh, I think I'm talking to a Scientologist. Listen, yes, there's a lot of things we can.
I'm going to jump on the couch like Tom Cruise.
You're starting to scare me. There are a lot of things we're going to figure out and cure and fix with technology. Maybe cancer someday, maybe electric cars. Yes, but here's the simple facts. Like 1 degree global climate change, as far as increasing
Right.
can raise the overall sea levels by 2.5 feet.
Right.
So if this continues, the biggest concern that I see is that a lot of our port cities, which there are, most civilizations were grown out of port cities,
Yeah, for
will
transportation.
be underwater. Right, Manhattan. If this trend were to continue, and we say the global climate difference is 3 degrees higher, in 20
Which would
years,
take centuries.
well, maybe not. It depends on how quickly this stuff is going up. If it takes centuries, yes, maybe we'll figure out something with the Matrix and Keanu Reeves will solve it. But right now, if this happens too quickly, New York could be underwater by 2050 or
All right.
stuff like that.
So we have Al Gore the second here. So here's some of the predictions that Inconvenient Truth made in 2006. Mount Kilimanjaro, the snow on Mount Kilimanjaro will be gone in 10 years. That was 3 years ago. It should have been all gone. And by the way, people pointed out that in the recorded history, Mount Kilimanjaro has lost its snow and it came back again. So that's one. Much of Florida will be underwater. They actually, in that documentary, they superimposed like the projections and like half of Florida was underwater. And most people say that would be centuries away before that could happen. They used Katrina footage to predict more frequent and destructive hurricanes. And actually, over the last 12 years, there's been less hurricanes. My point is that it's very difficult to predict how quickly a lot of this stuff will happen. And these alarmists have been doing this. They've been wrong. I'm not saying there isn't danger. There is. But it totally discounts the fact that we may solve this through innovation. And so, you're part of the problem from what I'm hearing here.
Well,
Mr. Naysayer.
Let me use your cell phone to stop floods and polar ice caps melting. Technology, you're such a technologist dreamer. There are some.
Maybe we'll invent a giant snowblower and it'll go and we'll recreate the Arctic.
Nature is bigger than any of us, right? I mean, if certain little things happen in the universe, the Earth is gone. So technology and robotics and advancements.
Am I dreaming?
You're dreaming. You're smoking. So I don't
You
think
can
you're dreaming.
say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one.
I think you're smoking something, actually.
Okay, so let's quickly go into the new Green Deal, Richie. We promised it to our audience. So these are just the environmental components of it. And let me just read through them quickly, and you can chime in as needed. Access to clean water, clean air, healthy and affordable food, and nature.
Sure, why not?
Meeting 100% of the power demand of the United States through clean, renewable, and zero-emissions energy sources.
Easy.
Repairing and upgrading the infrastructure of the United States, including by eliminating pollution and greenhouse gases emissions as much as technologically feasible.
Drop of a hat.
What does that mean? As much as technologically feasible. That means if it could happen.
You could have wrote that last one.
Yeah, really. Building and or upgrading to energy efficient, distributed, and smart power grids, and working to ensure affordable access to electricity. Upgrading all existing buildings in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And building new buildings to achieve maximal energy efficient, water efficiency, safety, affordability, comfort, and durability, including through electrification. Overhauling transportation systems in the United States to eliminate pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector as much as technologically feasible. That's a popular phrase. Spurring massive growth in clean energy manufacturing in the United States, removing pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from manufacturing and industry as much as technologically feasible.
Oh, my goodness.
And
Did
lastly,
you write this?
This is new Green Deal. Working collaboratively with farmers and ranchers in the United States to eliminate pollution and greenhouse gases emissions from the agriculture sector, like we were talking about, as much as
Technologically
feasible. At least he's listening to me once.
I am.
So,
First
so
time.
folks, that's when I read that, I thought of and this shows my age. I thought of the first Terminator movie. Rich, you
Love it.
You love
One of my
Terminator.
favorites.
And remember, the doctor is examining Sarah Connor, and she's telling him about the future. He's like, "Don't you just love this? It doesn't require a shred of proof." Remember that?
Yeah.
So, what are you thinking, Rich? Doesn't require a shred of proof. What do you think of these goals outlined by the new Green Deal? And we talked about how we would not pay for it, but what do you think about that?
They're wonderful, but they're hyper delusional. I mean,
No specificity.
maybe
How they're going to do it.
maybe if we just shove some type of fourth dimension mask on everybody's head.
I like your Matrix idea. That might be
The
the
Matrix
solution.
could be the solution, actually. we got to create a world of robots, and we need to come up with hundreds and hundreds of trillions of dollars,
Right.
and to get global agreement. Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous.
There's absolutely no specificity on how it's doing. It's just a vision document, I guess. I don't
They
even
should
know.
also add in there that humans should procreate with cats and dogs to create a nicer, furrier, warmer society, and that we should all wear
Sing
sneakers
Kumbaya.
and sing Kumbaya together while eating only carrots.
All right, so final thoughts on this topic, Rich. I guess my summation is humans are contributing. We don't know how much. I'm going to shy away from predictions of doom and gloom. I'm going to place my bet on the fact that we can only do so much as the United States. The other countries, we can't control them, and they're egregious polluters. We're going to lead the way in technological innovation, and I believe that our kids our grandkids will solve this problem and put us on a sustainable path. I'm an optimist today.
Oh my God. iGen, who can't even let people argue with them, or they have to go to safe zones and universities, are going to fix this problem.
They're
Hey,
so motivated, though, and they're technologically savvy.
here's the deal. It's not that difficult. I mean, if some of this stuff leads to just action, affirmative action with reducing plastics and replacing fossil fuels with alternative fuel, electricity and solar, and that's a good start. So if it leads to stuff like that, I have faith in that happening over time.
What are you personally going to do to affect this, Rich? How are you going to lower your greenhouse gases?
I am
Going to eat less chili?
I am only flushing the toilet once a day.
Who's chatting with us? I don't know. Someone's sending these chats. All right, so let's move on now. We're going to move and finish the show with a quick version of the Kroller Wiki. It's been a while, and if you're not familiar with the Kroller Wiki, Rich has a vast amount of knowledge, and he likes to inform us on the origin of common sayings. And the first saying, Rich, you're going to tell us how this originated, is a fly in the ointment. Where did that originate?
Well, if you go back a couple thousand years to the great Egypt civilization, there was a time where, it was different flora and fauna, and there were huge tsetse flies. I mean, these monstrous tsetse flies that used to plague Egypt from time to time, carry little children away in their beaks, and ointment. Essential oils, fragrant oils, were a big part of masking body odor and showing that you were wealthy and prominent. And they'd have the Egyptian slave folks making these vats of ointment for the pharaoh and the pharaoh's family. And wouldn't you know it, every once in a while, you'd get one of these, when a plague would come in, an enormous tsetse fly would swoop in, grab a little kid in the beak, and fall into these vats of ointment, completely screwing up one of the greatest, most fragrant oils and situations back in Egyptian times for the pharaohs.
And if it happened to be Cleopatra's ointment, you're gonna hit the death penalty.
You
right?
were dead.
You know what, Rich? I got to give you 100% on that. The old saying comes from the Bible in Ecclesiastes. The writer says that dead flies give perfume a bad smell, and perfume is translated as ointment. So you were right on track there, Richie.
That's why you asked me.
That's why we have them here. All right, the last one, Richie. Read the Riot Act. You've been read the Riot Act plenty of times.
Most of my life.
We're both married, so of course that happens.
I'm
I'm going to get in trouble for that one.
I've often been read the Riot Act. So there was a time, I believe it wasn't too long ago, but when Jimmy Hoffa and a lot of these unions were starting to take a hold in the American workforce and get the blue-collar worker better wages and better benefits, very often there would be riots that broke out. And in
Trying
order
to bust the non-union
bust
scabs.
the unions, there were strikes. I mean, the American workforce was in a dilemma in the 30s, 40s, 50s at one time. And the U.S. government came up with the Riot Act, and they'd often, before television was prevalent, they'd read the Riot Act over the airwaves to try to get people to conform to being civilized.
Interesting. I'd give you a half credit on that. You're going down the right thoroughfare. I like that word. Following a law of 1715, if a rowdy group of 12 or more people gathered, a magistrate would read an official statement ordering them to disperse. Anyone who did not, after 1 hour, could be arrested and punished. That was interesting. I didn't know that actually was a real thing, but you were close, Rich. That was probably your best showing in a while because you've been really weak at the Kroller Wiki.
Well,
in the
my
past.
wife's had me arrested several times after me not agreeing in an hour. So,
all right, folks. Well, that was a good show today. Any final comments, Richie, as we adjourned about climate change or any of the idiots or the Kroller Wiki?
I just hope Al Gore comes back and runs for president.
I don't even think that was too bad. We didn't do much prep, but we faked it pretty good that show.
Faked it really well.
All right, folks, make sure you plan to listen next episode when we talk about esports. Some of you are probably, if you're our age, you're probably saying, what in the world is esports? Well, just to give you an idea, the Overwatch League, it's an online league, drew 66 million unique viewers in 2018. So if you want to know more about esports, it's rapid ascension and how it may or may not replace traditional sports, as the young people don't watch TV, they don't watch sports, they don't listen to radio, they don't do the things that we baby boomers did when we were growing up. And as such, it's changing the nature of what we deem as sports. We'll talk about it next week. And as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See you all next episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.